Testing 1 2. 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 Test 1
Good morning, everyone. See, it stopped working, so I should not be president anymore. Hello? How's it going? Hey, Shelley. I have short-timer's disease, so watch out. Anything could happen this morning. All right, last plenary for this meeting. Thanks for all showing up. Very exciting lineup that we've got ahead going into lunch. And I'm going to ask Dave Jones to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Peter. I told Steve I would make this really quick, but I met Steve Adler from IBM, I think it was last April. Maybe it was last April at a White House event called Data Collaboratives. And it was really a terrific meeting where we were talking about data sharing, the future of that kind of stuff. And I saw Steve and I walked up and said hello to Steve, and he said, "I'm Steve Adler," and he says, "What do you do?" And so we got into a conversation about data sharing and all that sort of stuff, and it evolved into a couple of invitations that Steve asked me to come to IBM to talk about data sharing and collaboration, and Steve's experiences are just tremendous with regard to his experiences with Hurricane Sandy and the New York area, and just how important it is to evolve and share data and access data and have people work together, whether you're in developing countries or here in the US. And so when Aaron was saying, hey, we'd like to have a speaker on big data and all that sort of stuff, the first name that popped into mind was Steve Adler and IBM. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve. Thank you for coming to the ESIP Federation meeting. I hope that this is a good experience for you in the whole idea of putting data to work and making data matter. So welcome to the ESIP Federation meeting, and thanks for sharing some of your insights.
Thank you very much. Oh boy, wait. It's more sensitive than I thought. Can you guys hear me? Good. Good. Good morning. I don't like podiums, so I thought I would come down to talk to you guys this morning. First, let me say thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. I feel like I should have been here years ago, and it's really nice to meet some of the other information management, data governance professionals. I've only been involved in earth science or climate initiatives really only for a couple of years. I've been at IBM for about 20 years. Some of you may know that I played a key role in inventing the data governance industry. I created IBM's Data Governance Council in 2004. I led the council to create the first data governance maturity model, and I spent a lot of time in the data governance industry helping to create best practices and advance the state of the art. But about 2 years ago, as Dave said, I had a life-changing experience when I lived through Hurricane Sandy. I live in Long Island, New York, on the North Shore, and we had 3 weeks without power. And that was when I first felt both the full force of nature and the incompetence of officials trying to provide relief without really fully understanding what they were doing. And I became really interested in understanding, hey, why was it that these public officials, yeah, I'm going to come down the aisle, guys. I love this. I get to see all of your faces. I can't see you from up there. Why was it that public officials didn't understand that Category 5 hurricane would knock out the supply chain. Why was it they didn't prepare to have gasoline supplies and backup? Why didn't the power authority shut off the power grid just as the storm hit to prevent 1,000 transformers from blowing up? These seem like really logical things to do when you have a Category 5 storm hitting. But, you know, the reality is that our society is so large and complicated that our systems aren't connected. And the people who maybe have the knowledge about what could happen for a Category 5 storm are not talking to the people in Albany and in Trenton and in Mineola and advising them on proper precautions to take to prevent the havoc and misery that we all experienced for 3 weeks when we had no electricity, or when we had huge gas lines. And for me, personally, it was an experience in which I saw all the things that I took for granted fall apart. And that's when I started to become really passionate about weather and climate change. I had another experience this summer. I was in Addis Ababa speaking at a National Academy of Medicine conference on investing in young children, and they asked me to come talk to them about some work I did last year on the Ebola outbreak, where I used open data to help gather information, all available information about the Ebola outbreak to help the country of Sierra Leone marshal more information resources to fight the outbreak. And it was a really fascinating experience talking to this audience about how so much intervention that we have, how so many programs and policies to help different countries, developing countries, or our own countries, are intervention-based. We always wait for the bad thing to happen first, and then we respond. And it was at that moment that I began to realize that that was exactly the approach we're taking to climate change. In large measure, we're just waiting for the bad things to happen, and then we respond. And I thought we ought to, regardless of the politics of climate change, whether you think it's man-made, does anybody in the room think it's not? Good, I feel that I can continue now. Because there are a lot of other people outside the room who would like to contest that idea. One has to be a little careful how one progresses on that subject, and I'm not being videotaped, am I? Yeah. So I decided, let's just address this issue without talking about the politics. And just say there's some observable behaviors we see happening, and we ought to begin to prepare. And to prepare, we ought to collect more data. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. And I want to present what I'm talking to you about as a hypothesis, as a set of ideas that I hope provoke you to think a little bit, as well as act, because I need your help. So a little background about some things I'm working on. One of the hats that I wear is that has anybody heard of the Commerce Department's Data Advisory Council? Yeah, the people from the Commerce Department have heard of it. Nobody else has. The Commerce Department, Penny Pritzker created a data advisory council. It's a FACA, Federal Advisory Council. Who's heard of FACAs? Okay, good. It's a thing, it's an advisory council the government has, and they invite data experts to come and give them advice. The Commerce Department feels that the data that it has about the weather, about the oceans, about the census, about the patents, and about the economic performance of the United States is not widely utilized or known. But if we could get more of this data more widely utilized, we could impact GDP growth in this country between 1% and 3% additional GDP growth. That's the forecast that the Bureau of Economic Analysis has made about the value of the government's open data just in the Commerce Department. So she created this advisory council of experts, of which for some reason they chose me, to help give the Commerce Department advice on how to get more of their data out there. Another thing that I'm working on is I'm an anchor partner for something you probably also have never heard of. Who has heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? Not bad. For those of you who don't know, in September, the United Nations, who's heard of the Millennium Development Goals? Same number of people. These were goals to help organize international aid and development efforts and programs to focus specifically on specific initiatives in the developing world. The Millennium Development Goals were founded in 2000 and they ended in 2015. Mixed results. In 2015, we relaunched that whole effort with 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which I can't read, and they are around ending poverty and world hunger and good health and well-being and quality of education, gender equality, and there's one down here, climate action. And to help the world, there's a big UN announcement about this in September, and there's going to be $100 billion spent on this over the next 15 years. And to help the world improve the attainment of these targets, a group of us created the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Now I hope you guys are perking up and listening because I mentioned the word data. So what we're doing is we're trying to help the world capture more data about these goals and targets, to benchmark every nation's progress. And by the way, this isn't just for the developing world. We have challenges in the United States among these 17 SDGs. And the United States is working to collect data across the entire federal government to track our own progress in ending hunger, in women's equality, and in climate change, in all these goals. Now, why do I bring this up? This is one more introduction. There's also another group who's heard of OGP. Yeah, it's even smaller. The Open Government Partnership is a consortium of 70 countries that signed up, committed to principles of open government and open data. Who's heard of open data? Okay, I just want to see you breathing. So the Open Government Partnership was created in 2011, first with 12 countries. Countries that participate sign national action plans committing them to specific commitments around open budgeting and freedom of information and open data publishing, things like that. And so it's an international compliance program, voluntary compliance program. And since its founding, something like 2,000 commitments have been made around the world. The United States is in our third, we just announced our third national action plan. So we've had two prior, we're in our third. The third one was announced in Mexico City in October. And one of the key action items, one of the key commitments in the plan was around climate data. Have any of you seen climatedata.gov? Oh, that's good. Climatedata.gov is a warehouse, that's one way to put it, of about 70,000 data sets from across many different parts of the US government related to climate, weather, ocean temperatures. It's a lot of data that's is not widely utilized. As part of the United States commitment to climate change, in our third national action plan of OGP, the United States committed to creating an open climate data repository in which climate data would be made freely available to the scientific community for research and investigation. That is, to sort of widen the scope of climate research in the United States. And when they did that, they said that they're doing that consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're asking the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data to proliferate this idea to other nations around the world. Because today, the United States collects a lot of data about other nations that other nations are largely unaware of. We collect a huge amount of satellite and imagery data and weather data, temperature readings, ocean currents, tsunami readings about every nation on the planet. And most of these nations are totally unaware that this data is available to them for free and can be utilized. Many of these nations have weather services in their own countries. How many of you have worked with other nations and their weather services? Good. I need your help. Many of these nations have weather services that are underfunded. Does anybody disagree? Many times they don't retain the information they collect for long periods of time. They don't keep historical records of their weather data. And they don't share their weather data really on an international basis in open data repositories for scientific benefit. So what we are proposing in the global partnership with our partners, Colombia, the government of Colombia, Mexico, Morocco, Kenya, Philippines, France, UK, United States, is to begin to create national open climate data repositories that are semantically linked to each other through common metadata schemas that allow scientists to have much more information about how weather and climate are changing around the world. I got ahead. And that is the problem that I'm here to ask your help with. Because we have a massive challenge. We have a lot of countries that coming out of COP21, out of the Paris agreements, that are very eager to sign up and sign political commitments to do this work, which is great. There's no lack of political will right now. It's a golden moment, a golden opportunity to get nations to commit to doing this. It's never been done before. There are a few nations that collect a lot of weather data, and there's a lot of nations that are dependent on that data, but they don't share the ground station information that they're collecting themselves. And we propose an international network of open climate data repositories to share that information and gather much more granular information about weather patterns and trends in climate change. But of course, as you guys can probably well imagine, this is not a political challenge as much as it is a data challenge. And so what I'm asking you today is for your help to help us in the global community develop the data standards and architectures for this idea. I hope you're the right group. Are you? Yes. So I'm going to pause there and ask if anybody has any questions. Let's give you some mics. I'm not giving you a mic.
Many questions. Mark Parsons, Research Data Alliance. But just a quick one, is the WMO involved, World Meteorological Organization, involved in this effort? Because they're, in a sense, trying to do the same thing in a maybe sort of different framework.
No, we haven't reached out to them yet, and we're just sort of scanning the landscape so far, and we haven't reached out to them yet.
I'm Ramapriyan from Science Systems and Applications Incorporated and NASA Goddard Space Flight Center.
Yes.
As you were making the presentations, a couple of charts went pretty fast. I was curious about the color coding on some of the world maps.
Oh, which one?
That one. And
this one? That's a heat. I think that's
vulnerability, okay.
It's just supposed to be symbolic.
Okay.
Don't take it too literally. It's just supposed to be up there to show weather on the world.
Okay. There was another one a couple of charts back.
This one?
This one, yeah, right.
This is a list of the nations that are members of the Open Government Partnership. So these are the nations who are currently committing to open government and open data around the world. The Open Government Partnership has regional meetings. Like last year, we had a regional meeting in Dar es Salaam in Africa. We have global summits every 2 years. We just had one in Mexico. It's world leader level, cabinet minister level. It's fairly high level commitments at this level. And I put it up there to illustrate that the level of political commitment behind the idea for these types of climate repositories is very high. So the political commitment is there. I don't think people have thought yet about what it's going to cost. That comes later. But the political commitment is there, and they're looking to folks like us for the technical advice on how to do it.
And the different colors on the chart mean what?
The different colors have to do with when the country signed up to begin with. So the red colors are the initial 12 that joined at the beginning. And then, so every year there's new countries that join. And it indicates, in some sense, their level of maturity in terms of open government, you know, in terms of how long they've been members.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah.
This is Brian Bonlander from NCAR. I just wanted to bring up the issue of different scientific workflows that people use, and that can depend a lot on what country you live in.
Okay.
I'm encouraging, I think, both a top-down and bottom-up meeting at the center, because it's very easy to provide data in a format that nobody can actually use in a particular country.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Anyone else?
I'll wait for 5 seconds.
My sneakers today.
Hi, Steve Young, EPA retired and with Innovate Incorporated. Steve, just in terms of tables, are you familiar with the Global Earth Observation System of Systems initiative?
Yes.
Have you connected with them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just beginning to, yes.
Good, because
And the World Data System and the rest, yes.
unless they've moved, they're kind of co-located with WMO, and so out in Geneva. So you might be able to strategize strengthening connections with the GEOS initiative with the outreach to the WMO. But the aspirations of GEOS, I think, are very harmonious with what you're describing.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin Murphy, NASA. One of the questions is there a barrier that all the data within this catalog of catalogs needs to be open? Or is it going to expose all products?
I think there are some barriers, and they're cultural and financial, which you may be aware. Some nations charge for weather data, and there hasn't yet been some nations charge for weather data, and some nations feel threatened by other nations' weather data.
But in terms of discoverability, will you limit the products that would go into this type of discovery mechanism to those that are free and open, or?
What would be the advantage of limiting?
I was just asking.
No, I don't. I mean, I personally am open by default. Unless someone gives me a really strong reason why we should limit it, I would be against it.
Okay. The second one is, in addition to GEOS, are you familiar with the CEOS catalog?
No, what's that?
There's a CEOS WIGIS interoperability catalog called QUIC, which links together a number of U.S. agency and European and some Asian catalogs together.
I'd love to hear about that. So, can I get your card, and can you drop me
I think there's probably somebody better in the room to deal with that. But yeah, we can talk afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, is Karen here? Karen Moe?
How do you spell it? CEOS. Got it. CEOS. I'll remember that.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Steve, I have a question. So you mentioned in passing climate research.
Yes.
And I'm curious on what, from your perspective, on the ability of the assembly of this network of climate data repositories, on its ability to actually stimulate climate research, because I'm glad Gavin's gone because he'll kill me when I say this. Many would argue that climate research is not really happening because we're running climate scenarios to sort of focused on assessments and so on, and that the actual climate research is actually fairly limited. I'd sort of like to get your view on that.
limited, describe the limitation, describe what is the part who's in the limited group?
Well, the thing is that the people who were doing climate research are all running IPCC climate model in a comparison scenarios related to these assessments, rather than going out and sort of doing fundamental research on aspects of abrupt change in climate and true regional effects and feedbacks and improving the physics and all these things.
Yes. I agree. Totally agree. I'm going to try to answer that question without sounding like an idiot. What I have observed as a layman outside of the earth science industry and the climate industry is that there is this political environment that we're in creates a hotly, there aren't enough eyeballs on this subject. And the nomenclature itself is so highly technical that it limits wider public engagement in climate research. And we all know that innovation oftentimes happens when you bring new parties to the table, when you have more diverse groups that can coalesce around a well-established topic. And so it is one of the goals of freeing up this data, of both capturing information that nations are already capturing that they may never have thought was really worth hanging around and keeping for a while. There's I work with a lot of countries that have collected climatological weather data for decades, and they keep it for a little while and then they delete it. And they just didn't think it was worth saving because yesterday's weather isn't really interesting. And so there's a mindset that has to change. And then it's identifying that the weather data is indeed valuable, we ought to save it, that their local observations are relevant, that the amount of forecasting we can do is limited by a certain scale and size, and making this data more widely available to researchers around the world to run different types of scenarios than we have thought of yet. So that's why we're looking at this, is to find more data from more countries to provide more opportunities for more research. I see hands.
Bob Chen from Columbia University, and actually my center's a anchor partner in the Global Partnership.
Yeah.
So I would like to put out that I would like to put out that, even though access to climate data may still be a problem, there's been a lot of communication. I think that's what Peter's getting at. And that, that's not particularly a big limitation on what's needed, which I would argue is much more in the impacts, vulnerability, and interaction really with the other SDGs of climate. And getting that data is actually a much bigger challenge, and getting it integrated and semantically interoperable and usable with all sorts of other non-climate data that's related to the problem, which is impacts and adaptation and so forth, is really a bigger challenge. I hope the Global Partnership, among other things, will address.
So give me a scenario. So you mean who was it yesterday who gave us that presentation of drones and mapping of
on humanitarian response?
Right.
Yeah, well, that's one.
So you mean capturing the impacts of climate events themselves?
Well, and understanding how human infrastructure, how land use change, how food security, there's a whole bunch of data that's even less accessible than the climate data. Has even less tradition of sharing and doesn't have a organization like WMO that's been around for many decades promoting access. In those areas, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think the Global Partnership is trying to tackle that in the context of the SDGs.
Agreed. Good comment.
I think thinking about how it's, when people say climate research, there's climatological research, but then there's this broader community looking at these climate adaptation, vulnerability, resilience activities, and that's a much more disparate and less organized community.
Good point, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, here we are. Sorry.
So it's Brian Wee with the National Ecological Observatory Network. Something to add on to what Bob Chen said and what Peter Fox said there about research and about climate impacts and adaptation. So related to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is this relatively new worldwide research program, Future Earth, that looks into the impacts of climate on food safety, water safety. So now the ongoing emphasis is looking at, and some of the clusters here within ESIP work on this, is looking at the impacts of the changing climate on the food, energy, water nexus. And so here's a shout out to the agriculture and climate cluster here in ESIP, and also the energy and climate cluster. So we're looking at the impacts, again, going back to what Bob said. And so in this Future Earth global research program, they focus on the climate impacts and the data to inform those decisions. As Bob has said, the impacts is it's a wonderful opportunity to get involved, to say what are the socioeconomic impacts, what are the impacts to potential food production, looking into the future. And of course, in that instance, you're bringing in things like, the massive reinsurance industries who are very interested in forecasting the impacts using impact data that we have right now. So it's not just quote unquote pure biological climate data, it's also a lot of the biological data and even socioeconomic data that we need to integrate at some scale.
Yes, thank you. One more?
Steve, Dave Jones, I just wanted to speak just for a second about the ESIP Federation itself. And your question to everybody, did I come to the right place? I'd first like to answer that saying yes, you did come to the right place. And just what Brian was starting to talk about, there are clusters, there are working groups, there are committees that are together within the ESIP Federation, and even clusters that can stand up to address exactly what you're looking to accomplish and provide perhaps some really good input to the committee that you're on with the Department of Commerce.
But, it's interesting to listen to all the feedback from this audience, and I really appreciate it because you've given me a lot of new insights that I didn't have before I came here, so it totally validates your point. A lot of us at a policy level will look at issues like climate data, and we look at climatedata.gov, and we think, oh, it's so underutilized, and then you look around the world, you don't see that anybody else has one, and you think, well, there's a problem that needs to be solved. We don't have enough climate data. And then you learn from an audience like this, well, maybe we actually have meteorological level weather capture already. Maybe not everybody is doing it equally, but there are some standards and there is some stuff happening. Maybe what we could do, which would be more beneficial, is to link some of these climate events or weather events, or both, to impacts, to social, economic, political, cultural impacts, to start to document just what is happening at a smaller level. A flood in a river in Colombia may not make the news in the United States, and so we may not think about what the consequential impacts of that flood were and how it disrupted the economy and what it did to the supply chain and all the things that I lived through in Sandy. We may be seeing these small-scale Sandy kind of events around the world that we're not documenting. So I ask you, I'll turn this back and say, do people feel that that would be a valuable thing for nations to start to document in what we might call, and is that the work that you're doing?
This is what lots of books are doing.
Does people feel that, did I get that right? That's what I'm asking. I'm asking for your point of view on this as a dialogue.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I like the way this discussion is going. I'm Robert Wolf at the U.S. Global Change Research Program Office. And I like the way this conversation is going because I do think there is a relatively solid foundation in terms of physical data, climatological data available. What the community is working to build now is a better understanding of the social economic data and how that's used. And I think, documenting these events, which you mentioned, could be very important, but just gathering the social, where the vulnerabilities are, where the risks are, understanding those risks, and being able to look at how climate change and just weather variability itself impacts different communities, and bring that data together is really useful. So I think having the stories to kind of fill in the details and understand the impacts is good, but also you need to just the basic data that you can then predict into the future what the impacts will be is really important as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I know from my own engagement in different countries that nobody is yet thinking about that. But it's the kind of data challenge that only you can't collect that from space. You have to know the population that's involved. It requires local knowledge. You can maybe get a satellite reading of how many buildings were damaged by a tsunami, but you really won't know how the lives of the people who were in the buildings were changed. You won't really know how long-lasting the impacts are, the psychological consequences. Those are only things that people on the ground, and aid workers can't give you all that information either. It's something that you have to document over time. And I don't think countries have done that yet. I don't think we're even doing that in the United States after Sandy. And we're still fighting in New York about getting aid from New York City, about getting insurance reimbursement. So, and document, I don't think anyone's documented what's happened to the families that didn't get it. How have their lives changed? Did they lose their home? Did they lose their jobs? Have they moved out of the region? What's happened? I don't think we're documenting that. That's really valuable.
We're going to take one more question over here before we move on to the next panel.
One last comment.
Yes.
Randall. My name is Randall from SSAI. When you're talking about mapping climate events to the broader weather patterns, a lot of climate events don't get names. Hurricane Sandy was one that did have a name. It was a huge event, but there are other similar things, such as the recent tornadoes in the South. Nobody names tornadoes, and the Arctic recently had a 50-degree Fahrenheit temperature spike just last week.
They don't get like a number or something. They don't get. We don't like give each tornado a specific indicator and a range of its. We don't document. Nobody does that.
Yeah, more indicators. The number of tornado warnings, documentation, the Weather Service, but it's not public.
Wow.
So tracking back to specific events.
There's a disaster identifier?
The data would be it's like, Oklahoma, we talked about the major 1999 tornado.
There was only one?
There was a famous because of what it did.
Oh, so the really famous ones, like the famous outlaws, they get a name. But the low-level petty criminals, they don't get famous names. Got it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Other events such as
the Arctic had a recent 50-degree Fahrenheit temperature spike just last week. That's not causing any disaster for any humans, so that's not going to have any sort of a meteorological warning number assigned to it. But yet that's a significant event.
Right.
Or a couple winters ago, we talked about the polar vortex. That's sort of got a name coming down, but there are a lot of things.
We had another one last week for the same name.
Right. So identifiers for those kinds of events are really sort of seeming to be lacking in many cases. To track those events.
Wow. So we don't have consistent naming for meteorological events that we record over time. Do we record any information about the ones that we don't name? Do we record the size, the scope, the velocity of the wind, how far it traveled over the Earth? That gets recorded, right? Does it get an ID and then it gets some kind of scope or something?
Go back in an archive, and then if that becomes a research topic of interest, people will trace that back.
We have a comment back here.
I'm sorry, I'm running out of time.
Yeah, we're bleeding a little bit into the session, but I can't refuse the Martha Maiden Award winner for this year.
Ask as many questions as you want.
Actually, it's not a question. Well, it might be a question. But I just did a little quick Google because I've been aware of a lot of, citizen science and local traditional knowledge type projects because I'm involved with some of them. But if you just even Google things like climate stories, there's a lot of organizations that are collecting that. What I don't see is a connection from people's experiences that are being documented to the data. Or, in other words, the connection between, the places that people are recording their experiences with the science, per se, so much. And I'm kind of thinking that that's more or less what you're looking for, I think.
I think that's part of it. So you're talking the journalistic stories about...
Well, no, these are not even journalistic. I mean, like climatestories.org or climatestories.us. Those sorts of things. There's a lot of these out there.
Okay.
And a lot of communities really do want to get their stories out. Yeah. I work with ones in the very far north. Right. Who really do want to, basically get people to understand that the things that are happening to their communities because of climate change are having severe impacts. And so...
Yeah, I met a guy, I did an event in Washington back in October. We had, do you know Carl Gantner? Does that ring a bell? He runs a little nonprofit called Circle of Blue. And he used to be a National Geographic photographer, and he goes around the world and he finds these small indigenous communities that have been affected by climate change, and he lives with them. He goes to lives in an yurt in Mongolia for 3 months, and he documents through photography and journalistic writing what their stories are. And there may be many other journalists around the world who are documenting those other stories as well. And as you point out, what they're not doing is they're not linking it to the science. They're not linking it to the names we don't have for the storms and the occurrences that are happening. Does that sound like a worthy... Go ahead.
There is a
Hang on. First of all, Bob, you can get the last word, but
I'll let him talk, and I won't answer.
Give Annie, can you give Bob the mic?
And we're also going to have about 10 minutes for questions at the very end for all of the panelists, so you'll have a few more minutes.
Yeah, no, just to say, there is a research community that documents disaster losses. They have a system for naming losses. It's biased. It does not record events that don't result in losses. No. So that's an issue.
Yeah.
But that community exists. They have a peril hazard classification. It's called the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk Program of the International Council for Science.
So I'm out of time, but I wish we had another hour to talk because I really would appreciate more conversations like this with you. And that's why I came today. I hope you realize I didn't come with a priori assumptions or some arrogant view about what we think should happen. I really came with some ideas, and you've given me a lot of food for thought, and I hope we continue to work together. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Not your typical IBM talk, which is great. I see your suitcase there. Are you going to be around through lunch?
Till about 12.
Till about, okay. So, but let us know if you want to get in touch with Steve. We're going to move to the last section of the plenary this morning in the Federal Big Data and Earth Science panel. We have 3 speakers. The first one is Jeff de la Beaujardière from NOAA, and we're going to be followed with NASA and USGS, and then we're going to get them to all sit up front and you can grill them.
Impressive pronunciation. Thank you, Peter.
So I was asked to talk about the NOAA Big Data Project. Some of you may have seen some of these slides. If you were at AGU, sorry about that. You could either check your email or search for subtle differences. I think that would be a better activity. My name is Jeff de la Beaujardière, and I'm the NOAA Data Management Architect, and I'm involved in this project, but I'm not running it. Some of you heard from Amy Gaskins, who's the program manager that we recently hired. My talk is very different from hers. I just present it in a different way. So it's definitely will be something new if you saw that other one. So first of all, I do want to stress NOAA is obviously a big data agency, multiple petabytes of data, 10 satellites, 150 radars, buoys, tide gauges, and so forth, ships, aircraft, and numerical models, lots and lots of outputs from numerical models. The quote is from the bottom of the sea to the surface of the sun, being the range of the environment that we study. And the data are unique, they're valuable, it costs a lot of money to collect, they can't be replaced, we can't go back and remeasure once the time has passed, and you, the taxpayers, are paying us to collect this. So they should be readily accessible and usable. And we're working on things to make it more that way, which is good, but I think we can do better, and that this big data project is one of the ways we can do better. There's a couple premises here. One is there is value in our data that we haven't realized yet because it's too hard to get to or too hard to bring a whole bunch of it together in one place to work on. So we do get a ton of value out of NOAA data, right? Tornado warnings, for example, weather forecast for tomorrow, assessments of the climate, non-weather related things. I mean, we get value. The primary users are serving the NOAA mission of saving lives and property and so forth. So that's great. But maybe there's even more value we can get out of the data. So the second premise is that if we put the data in the cloud so that you could just compute directly on the data instead of having to bring it to your facility first, then the private sector might be able to generate new value-added products or services. This is important just because it would be interesting because, as the Secretary of Commerce said, it might boost economic productivity in the U.S., and NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce, so that's why that side of it is pushed a little bit. The third premise is maybe the private sector would be willing to help pay some of the costs of, say, storage of data in the cloud because they thought they might be able to recoup those costs somehow downstream, say by selling computing time. And that finally, maybe we can do a self-sustaining partnership on this. So how does this kind of differ from what we're already doing? And I want to stress, we're still going to do the things that we're already doing. This is kind of an add-on. This is not a replacement for our existing data services. But right now we have a bunch of data sources, right? Satellites, radars, buoys, whatever. And then out there somewhere, there's a bunch of user tools, portals, decision support tools, so forth, various software models themselves. Maybe already, there are some sort of value-adding resellers, especially in the weather industry. And so, other way. So we are trying to improve how things get from the sources to the users. Think of it as kind of a data services layer we're building with better, more standardized search and discovery, data access, metadata, formats, vocabularies, all kinds of things that we in ESIP have been talking about for a long time, and within the government for a while. So we are trying to move this forward. And in fact, I think, Jeff, are you going to mention the common framework in your thing? Yeah, great. Okay. So, excellent. So I won't say anything more about that. But so we're working on that, and that's great, and we got to keep doing it. But even if this were perfect, we had standardized access and discovery everywhere, and everybody did the right thing, what does it really mean? It means that, there's not some magic box in the middle that does all this. What it still means is somewhere there's a catalog or more than one catalog floating outside that you've got to talk to. And then once you find the data you want, well, we've got access servers on these various sources. And then if you want to use the data, you have to actually go and make a copy of the data in your own facility. And that's great if you just want a little bit of data. In fact, a lot of the services are very good at subsetting. You want just a piece of a much larger thing. Well, you use an OpenDAP server or a web coverage service or something like that, and you just get the data you want, and that's great. But if you want all the data or a lot of the data, then there's a problem. It's an effort to get to you, and you have to be able to support it. So
The Big Data Project is trying to address that. We're saying, look, we're going to keep our master copy of the data. We're not deleting our copy of Earth obs or model outputs. And we're still going to run agency services like the catalog service and access services and so forth. But let's also push a copy of the data, or at least some of the data, into the cloud. One cloud, multiple clouds, a little bit TB determined. But push a copy of the data out in the cloud so that other people, not NOAA, can develop software that operates on these data. Well, in fact, they could use some of our software that happens to operate, but they could make other software, other tools, custom products and services for even individual users or communities like the one affected by the Hurricane Sandy, for example. Local decision makers able to plan what they should be doing. Products and services at a level of detail that NOAA, as a national agency, is not really going to be getting into. So that's the basic idea. We have our data, we send it to the cloud, people can work on it and do new things with it that weren't done before. So this idea came up, well, geez, I guess it's been now 2 years. We sent out an RFI, request for information, in February 2014, saying, is this a good idea? Should we do something like this? Can you give us some ideas about how to do it and so forth? We got a lot of response. We got over 70 responses to this RFI, big, 50-page things that we, sort of read through and analyzed. Some of them were really good. Some of them were, resumes of people who wanted to work with us, but, or, marketing literature about tape drives or something, but a lot of them were very good. And then we had an industry day to get even more kind of feedback, 300 people there. And we realized, we can't just issue a contract for this where we don't really know if this is going to work. Let's treat this more as an R&D project, just to kind of explore how we should do this. And so we eventually ended up issuing 5 R&D agreements, cooperative research and development agreements, in April. So it's been, like 9 months or something like that, with Amazon, Google, IBM, Microsoft, and Open Cloud Consortium. And you can go to this webpage at data-alliance.noaa.gov. Sorry, the URL is so small up there. But, so it's kind of a small webpage that links to each of these sites and their work on these collaborators and work on it. The idea is, we have our data, we have our services, and we would work, in addition to anybody else who wants to talk to our regular services, we would work specifically with these 5 cloud providers to get copies of whichever data they want, and they sort of get to decide. They're not being forced to take everything. And then they, in turn, would work with partners who are interested in building value-added products and services. So we kind of work with 5 people or 5 entities, and then they work with however many they can. In fact, these partners can work with multiple cloud providers, so they can choose based on, either this cloud has that data or I'm used to working in this cloud environment, so I'm going to keep doing that. And by the way, I should mention, so the 4, I say these in alphabetical order just to be fair. The first 4, Amazon, Google, IBM, Microsoft, are commercial companies, obviously, and then Open Cloud Consortium is a kind of academic thing out of the University of Chicago, as I recall, focused on scientific computing and so forth. By the way, is anybody here from Open Cloud Consortium? Okay, because I wanted to chat. Okay. Yes. What? Sort of. Okay. All right. Well, it's kind of open and cloudy. Yeah. Okay. So there's the concept: send data, and these partners work on it. So we're moving on this slowly, maybe not quite as fast as we wanted to, but we do have the first full, very large data set that has been transferred into now multiple clouds, and that is the NEXRAD Level 2 reflectivity data. You may have seen these things, these spherical things around airports, for example. Those are the weather radars. You can use the data to generate 3D maps of, for example, this tornado. You might have seen things like this, right? The precipitation maps that show you if the rain is coming. So you can see the data now. It's not that you can't get to the data at all. And you can even go to the, what used to be the National Climatic Data Center, now in National Centers for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina, has the data available, and you can get to it, but it hasn't traditionally been very easy. You go station by station, maybe you can go by name or something like that. If you want recent stuff, it's quick. If you wanted old stuff, it might have to get read off robotic tape before you could get it. And if you wanted all of the old stuff, it was very, very slow. In fact, a person who worked with us trying to set this up, Alan Sternberg, who's one of the founders of the Weather Underground, once tried to do this, and it was taking him more than one day to get a day's worth of data. So he realized he would probably never be able to actually get the whole thing. Well, so now we've made the effort to really get all this data off of tape and send it into the cloud for the first time. The first of the companies that has gotten all of it is Amazon, and they have a public announcement about it, but Microsoft and Google, I believe, also now have the full set, and Open Cloud Consortium has, I think, 2015, and is going to keep sort of a recent period, but it's not going all the way back. So the Amazon is the one I know about the most because they have kind of done this publicly right now. They have the data from 1991 when these radars started, through now, I should change that to 2016. They got everything out of the archive, and they got a real-time feed using the Unidata Internet Data Distribution Local Data Manager mechanism that was already out there. So they're filling up their data. They're doing stuff on ingest to repackage it nicely. And they've got 270 terabytes of data compressed, 1 petabyte if you uncompress it. And there's a public announcement about the data here. So anybody now can come and work on the data and download it. And so the data, we know are not paying for the hosting of the data. You, if you want to download it, don't have to pay any egress charges, at least in the Amazon S3 case. If you want to compute on it, which I think is better, just compute in place, you would have to pay computation charges, but that could be as cheap as a penny an hour or up to, I don't know, $5 an hour, depending on your urgency and amount of power you want. But you can compute directly on that for, let's say, modest sums, and you are now able to just do analyses over the whole data set. So this is the first of data sets. We hope to do more. We will certainly do more. One is the MRMS, multi-radar, multi-sensor, which is sort of a higher level product derived from the radar data. And in fact, I believe, Steve, related to weather events, that this includes events that were detected. The signatures of events are kind of put in here. And I don't know if they have IDs or names or whatever. 3 minutes, that's good, we're getting there. All right, another one, probably really next up, is geostationary. The GOES satellites that are there now, and then GOES are coming out, trying to figure out how do we get that in, including making the GOES-R data available as soon as possible for a satellite that hasn't even been launched yet. Numerical models, this is a very important one. They want full resolution numerical model outputs, the finest possible time steps, more fine than we currently make available. So this will require a big effort actually to figure out how we tap into the supercomputers to get that out. LiDAR is another thing that's been put out. So we have a ton of data. We don't know yet what's going to go. It's the partners who decide what they want based on what they feel there's some utility for. NOAA is not going to go away in this. We still going to ensure open data, access to everything. We have authoritative data. We still do research. We're going to preserve the data. We're going to do scientific stewardship. We have the expertise of the data. So we're still here and doing important things, and we're not turning off anything that we're already running. So we feel we've learned a lot. It's been more work than we thought maybe to get the first data set out there. Things went a little more slower on the government side than maybe the private sector was expecting, but that's the way it goes. But even this one data set so far has generated great interest. So I think this cloud technology is going to introduce significant changes for how we do certain things as a science agency, but that we will still have a major role and responsibility. And I believe these public-private partnerships will work out, and by leveraging each other's expertise, and will continue beyond the term of these R&D agreements. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. And we're going to hold off on questions until we're through. Next, we've got Jeff Walter from NASA.
Okay,
I'm Jeff Walter from NASA. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the big data things going on with NASA's EOS DIS, Earth Observing System Data and Information System. So this is a dramatically oversimplified example of what EOS DIS does and where it fits into kind of the whole in NASA system. Most of our data comes from, certainly not all, but most comes from satellites. Data is downlinked, captured and cleaned, and then gets sent to EOS DIS for, in some cases, processing, archive, perhaps subsetting, and then distribution to a variety of different user types. And we have 12 different distributed active archive centers across the country that perform this function. So traditionally, particularly in the early days, volume is obviously a concern, right? So this graph shows, how our archive volume has grown since the early 2000s, coupled with the distribution volume. And it's, that everything, both archive and distribution volume have been going up, year over year. So the typical distribution paradigm is, you find your data, you find what you need and you download it. You may subset it, but you download it to your location and you do your analysis on it. And this paradigm works for some people, but it's typically difficult to do your kind of analysis at scale. And we've been able, but we've been sort of getting by this way. Mostly because, storage densities and network capacities have increased over the years and costs have dropped. So we've been able to sort of keep up with doing things this way. However, it has traditionally been, like I said, difficult to do your analysis at scale unless you're doing it on one of the smaller data sets. One of the more voluminous things, as many of you, maybe have attempted this, it's difficult, but we've been able to kind of push this, can down the road, even been thinking for a long time, how do we improve the situation? The situations coming up are going to sort of force us to rethink that in the sooner rather than later, because now the archive is 10 or so petabytes. In the 2022 timeframe, NASA is there's two missions being developed in the pipeline now, SWAT and NISAR, that are going to increase this volume by tenfold over the course of 3 years. So we're going to be forced, to kind of rethink. How is the system architected to begin with? But some of the technologies that are maturing, particularly cloud technology, is going to, enable us to do that. And we've been actually thinking a lot about, something similar to what the NOAA Big Data Project is doing. How can we leverage cloud technology? What data sets should we put out there? What services can we layer on it to allow people to do these things, at scale, in the short term and as well as for the longer term. So, but with that said, I would say that, even with all those pressures, that volume isn't even necessarily our biggest challenge. It's a big one, but it's not our biggest one. I think our biggest challenge from the point of view of resources required to address it, particularly human resources, is the data variety. This is, I think, what drives a lot of what we do. So you could see since the early 2000s, the number of different types of products that we distribute have gone from, on the order of a few hundred to now, well over 3,000. And there's a lot of different types of things from a lot of different sources, and the variety comes from these sorts of things here. There's instruments, you have different satellites. Those satellites have different, footprints. You have aircraft and in situ data, which have, maybe different levels of accuracy, but much lower, spatial extents. Same instrument on a different satellite, or your instrument in satellite, you have multiple different algorithms, processing levels, map projections, aggregate different time and spatial aggregations, and data formats. So all of this, leads to a very high degree, of complexity, which is often confusing for users, and it leads to challenges specifically with data management. Because the more data sets you have, and those data sets are very complex, it leads to management challenges, but then also data, interoperability. How do you use these data sets together when they're so different? And you don't have to really pick too far, below the surface to run into issues doing this. So, and these issues sort of cut across the entire user experience with respect to, data discovery, access and use. It runs the entire gamut. But over the years, and we in recent years, we've really been pushing to make improvements in some of these areas. So we've always emphasized standardized data formats and metadata formats, which really helps reduce some of the complexity. But we're also in the process of doing these other things. Assigning DOIs. We're developing a common metadata repository, which will be big. If any of you ever used Echo or Reverb, this will be a dramatic improvement over that. Much richer metadata model that facilitates hopefully a lot of new functionality. We have a global image browse service, which is a tiled map service for not every piece of data, but a lot of things, and we're continuing to populate that. It serves data out in a standardized via web map tile service protocol. And we have an ESDIS standards office to kind of oversee, okay, how do we stay on top of making sure that we're adhering to open standards. So, in the meantime, while we're working on these things, we've also been working with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So that the U.S. federal government is the largest holder of civil Earth observation data in the world, but OSTP is recognized, and rightly so, that a lot of times even consider the challenges that the research user has, it's still difficult for sometimes, for the non-expert user to discover, access, and use this data. So, over the course of decades, the U.S. Taxpayer has made a substantial investment in these capabilities. So, OSTP is interested in, how do we increase our return on investment, on this thing? As great as this has been, how can we even get more out of it? Because, the problems are there. So they proposed something that they call the Big Earth Data Initiative, which is designed to improve the interoperability specifically of Earth observation data and systems, across the federal government, and also to improve Earth observation data management practices. So, the larger agencies, have NASA, NOAA, we have budgets, substantial budgets to help us, manage these things. Some of the smaller agencies have a little bit harder time with this. They might not have its data as open as you want it, et cetera. And the U.S. Group on Earth Observations is tasked with sort of coordination and oversight of this effort. And the president's, 2014 through 2016 up until present, budget requests have included funding specifically for NASA, NOAA, and USGS to implement these objectives to improve the discoverability, accessibility, and usability of Earth observation data. Now, because of the inscrutability of congressional committee politics, when they first started this effort, for the first year, NASA, we were the only ones that received actual funding for this. So we had a little bit of a head start on trying to do some of these things to meet OSTP's goals. We got this funding. We thought, okay, what sort of approach do we take to this? And again, Jeff brought up in maybe using somewhat different terms that you have to do some thinking about what is the role of government? How far do we go down this road? So we decided to the main thing we can do, the best thing we can do, is to not try to imagine every problem everybody can solve. The best thing we can do is to focus on enabling pieces. We're not to necessarily go all the way and build end user applications. We have some of that stuff, and that's great. But if we can really create a robust infrastructure that's standards based, and that's the second bullet, drive everything sort of towards open standards. You enable others to come in and extract value from your data, build tools, do things that we maybe haven't imagined. So you enable the community to engage with your data without having to necessarily involve us in the loop. And again, since we were the ones that got funding for the first year, we wanted to the maximum extent design and execute what we're doing so that the output of our activities and our products can be useful to everybody. So we wanted to take care to not just apply it to our particular pet projects. It might have been good for us, but maybe everybody else would have been like, who cares? And then also, again, like I mentioned earlier, we're already doing some of this stuff. We're moving in some of these directions. So we wanted to kind of leverage and accelerate some of the things that we were already doing. So our activities focused on kind of these four main bullets here. We wanted to do some catalog and data discovery improvements, and specifically metadata guidance and recommendations. How do we, metadata is sometimes a difficult thing for people who, particularly people who aren't experienced with it, to provide and create. There's a lot of overhead in figuring it out, and the standards can be complex. If any of you have looked at ISO 19115, it can be very complex. So we funded our resident metadata expert, Ted Haberman, to develop some tools to sort of help providers with developing and providing metadata, but then also for anybody to kind of evaluate the status and the quality of your existing metadata. And I think Ted spoke about it in his session yesterday, if any of you were at that. And also to apply, accelerate the assignment of DOIs and develop DOI best practices and recommendations for how you do that. How does your landing page look? What kind of information do you need to have? That sort of thing. And the web services for direct data access. So, we've had, across our 12 data centers, we've traditionally had a variety of different services. You have things like OpenDAP and all these other sorts of things. But we, at least in our program, it's been sort of instantiated unevenly. So we wanted to kind of raise the level of that and get more data sets provided by that sort of common and other standards-based services, so that across the spectrum of EOS DIS, you have a more even level of data available via OpenDAP or a web service or some other kind of standards-based thing. And then also we had, our data centers have made some specific contributions in that space. Specifically, the Langley ASDC made some improvements to the GDAL libraries to facilitate, the use of our data with your sort of standard GIS tools, which has been can sometimes be difficult. And then the land processes stack at USGS has a tool called Appears, which is sort of an OpenDAP-based thing that allows you to do some kind of in-place analysis and graphing and things like that on the data. So there are a couple different things like that we have going on. And then at the data centers themselves, to implement these actual improvements, so to make sure that all of our metadata is current and consistent and complete. We have DOIs fully assigned, and that, again, like I said, the data available via these services, and then also support for USGeo. So this is our forum for this kind of interagency coordination and prioritization for what types of things, what do we as a federal government want to accomplish, to make sure we're all on the same page and not just fomenting stovepipes. One thing I want to sort of put a plug in for was one of the things that we did recently, and actually was just released last month, was we came up with this common framework for Earth observation data, which describes what we think are a good set of standards and practices, data management practices that the federal government should be using. And the OSTP has released this for comment, and they're soliciting comments through January 15th. And I actually this morning retweeted the OSTP announcement with the ESIP Fed hashtag. So you should all be able to find that. I encourage you to read it and make your comments. They're definitely soliciting feedback. And one other thing I didn't put on the slide, some of the work that we've done, a lot of the stuff that we've done, we've developed webinars on it if you want to hear more about it. And it's on, we have a YouTube channel called NASA Earth Data. And if you go there, you can see there are about 50 minute webinars on a number of these things if you want to get more detail about what this is about. So that was all. All right.
Thanks, Jeff. Next up is Sky Bristol from the survey.
Where's the command watch and shift H. Uh-oh. Maybe it's an L. Apologize for not teeing this up ahead of time.
Whirly gig. So I'm going to share something a little bit different, and probably that's because I'm a nonconformist, or possibly it's because I've been working to work myself out of one job and into another job, and so I'm thinking more about things in a little bit different way than I have before. So this is not probably something that anybody's seen. In fact, I just finished it a few minutes ago, so it's all rather new. And I did send an abstract in on this a while ago, and I'll stick fairly close to that. So anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about big data without big budget, and maybe make a case for why this might be a good thing, and share a few things about how we actually can use this community a little bit more to power what we're trying to do operationally in the big data world. So we've probably all seen a number of different things on where the federal budget has been going over the years. We're fairly flat. We're declining in a number of different areas. We have a lot of different competing priorities in the nation that are competing for the little bit of funding that we have. And in terms of the overall networking and IT R&D budget specifically, that has also stayed fairly flat. And you'll notice in here, NASA's in here specifically, Commerce is in here specifically, of which NOAA is an awfully big part of that. And I come from the other, USGS. We're actually a really small piece of the other. In fact, the Department of Interior budget has remained somewhere around the $70 to $80 billion a year realm. We are in the $1 billion a year realm piece of that in the USGS as a whole. And some of the work that I've done in the past looking at the budget has showed that we probably have about an $88 million a year shortfall in terms of what we're really putting into data management and distribution versus what we maybe should be putting into it if we were to be doing it right. So, and I don't really need to say in this community that the demands on us and the demands for funding for that are going up. As we bring more and more data online, more and more products online, more and more of the challenges that we have to deal with. So that's not going to change anytime soon. Despite big Earth data initiatives and other things that are absolutely fantastic to help move us along, that's not going to change completely. So I've been pondering this kind of conundrum a little bit lately, that there's a necessary life cycle between operating our various systems, engineering those various systems, and doing the research and development that needs to go into those in various ways. And I'm still fiddling with this diagram and kind of thinking about where I'm going to take it and where it's going to go. But I've observed this in the USGS over time, that we have some groups that are really fully operational and they're doing operational things and they're doing a fairly good job. But, for the most part, they're pretty old school. They've got interesting technologies online. You can get to their data, but there's nothing new there, and it's really kind of difficult to use some of those systems, and they're not really taking advantage of anything on the other side of that spectrum. They're not pulling in new research and development. And we have a few groups in USGS, and I've seen it a whole lot more out in NSF-funded projects in particular, where you get money to go in and do some really cool data thing, and you do a great research project, and you spin some stuff up, but it never actually goes in through an engineering cycle to turn it into something that's hardened and solid and really, really well functioning. And we try to operate it, so we try to go directly from R&D into operations, and we haven't gone through that other step, and so it's really difficult to operate it and make it run appropriately. So I've been pondering on this conundrum and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we deal with flat budget? How do we deal with massively escalating issues that we need to deal with? And how do we do that in a way that can work between those two worlds? So I've taken some inspiration inspiration from some things that Phil Bourne and folks at the NIH have been doing. I first met Phil Bourne a couple of years ago as part of a big data senior steering group I've been involved in, and started hearing about his ideas for the commons and what that was all about. And he and colleagues just put out a paper in Nature that's kind of interesting, just a little 2-pager on the commons idea, really laying out the, how they're going to do that. But, NIH is huge. I mean, in terms of overall budget, they're way bigger than we are by any means. I look at some of the things those guys are doing and I'm just, blown away. But, they have the same issue. They have a whole bunch of different groups that are doing interesting work. None of them are funded to the level that they really need to be to fully accomplish that. So they're trying to bring it all together with a number of strategies that include new business models for how they operate, how they put funding out to funded projects, new ideas about how all of the research objects, whether it's data or publications or people and organizations, can come together in some kind of a cohesive way. And so I've been thinking about the commons and what they're doing, and talking to a number of folks about that and thinking about how that relates to our particular area. And I say, to some extent, but wait, don't we already have a commons? Doesn't that already exist? Aren't we the commons here in this organization? And so yes, we are. To a certain extent, we very much are. But now I'm thinking about, well, what else do we need to do? Where do we need to go with this? What does the commons need to mean for all of us? And particularly from my own kind of personal interest, what does it mean to USGS? And what does it mean to help me accomplish the things that I need to do in my new job that I'm trying to get into in biogeographic characterization work? So we have some things out there. We've got a lot of stuff. There's about 5,000 pages of content or so on the ESIP wiki, which of all of the ESIP web ecosystem is the most easy for me to understand. I get a little lost in the ESIP commons, but the ESIP wiki has a lot of tremendous information on it. We have the ESIP testbed activity that's going on, and so we have a piece of developing capability out there to do some level of R&D work that needs to go on to develop new ideas and innovate some things through. Some folks have taken advantage of the ESIP wiki to really coalesce a tremendous body of knowledge. I mean, if you are paying attention to what's going on in the documentation world and all of the connections between all of the different standards, there's a tremendous wealth of knowledge that's been developed there and a number of amazing tools to use in terms of rectifying between all of the different metadata standards and conventions that we have. But wait, though, we also have these other things, and maybe this is part of the issue. We have a MyUSGS system for MyUSGS. That's our wiki space where our community for data integration is doing its work, and we've got a bunch of information out there too. Not everybody knows that that's there. They don't know that that's available. And NASA's got one too. They've got another Atlassian wiki space where there's a tremendous amount of activity going on, including all of the stuff that we did on the Common Framework for Earth Observation Data that Jeff mentioned. So there's a bunch of these different things out there, and sometimes maybe between the ESIP wiki and the agency wikis and all of these things, I'm getting a little bit lost out there. So I was just taking a look this morning because I'm a little bit behind the times and everything, and at the strategic plan for ESIP that's coming out here, or that's moving its way along, that we just approved this morning. And there's a couple of goals in there that I found kind of compelling that were pretty striking to me about, that kind of resonate with what I've been thinking about here. There's this goal to strengthen the ties between observations and users' communities, between technology, research, education, and applications. And I wanted to mention one thing here specific to education that we're doing coming up here in a few months, that we're going to try to take advantage of really more of the ESIP ecosystem to pull off. Between the Community for Data Integration and the ESIP Federation, we're bringing together a joint software carpentry and data carpentry workshop out in Denver in April. You'll be seeing something on that fairly soon. Some of you already did and provided some input on your interest in that. So we're going to try to bring that together, and we're kind of scheming on having a day specifically that's more of a hackathon. So 2 days of workshop, and then bring your real issues to the table and see what we can do to fix those. I had a very selfish desire to do that from my own team, because I've got some folks who I need to get through software carpentry in particular, but it seemed to make sense to maybe do that on a little bit grander scale. So we're hoping to get 75 or 80 folks or so through that, mostly in the Denver area, but certainly from other areas as well. And then this goal 4 was really striking to me as well for a number of things. So position ESIP to play a major role in earth science issues, addressing the effects of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and supporting sustainable science data infrastructure. Those are really big words, sustainable science data infrastructure. And I would say that that 3-part piece of operations, engineering, and research that I mentioned is really we need all of that in order to bring about sustainable scientific data infrastructure. And I'd argue in a number of ways that none of us are doing it fully right. None of us are doing it fully well, completely across the board. So then I also had this last night. This was my poster that I still haven't been able to get posted up to the Commons site, but I'll do that sometime fairly soon. And you know, a couple of observations about this. I think Rich Signell pointed out that you know, this was god awful, incredibly wordy, and kind of like something I would have done as a grad student. So I do apologize for that. But it's drafty, and I'm still working on it. But the thing here is, so and something else I think Doug Phils pointed out. He said after we talked about it for a little while and pondered on a number of the different things that are in this thing, that gosh, this is really kind of big. There's a lot of stuff here, and this is something that I'm working on out of my little program now in USGS, and I'm trying to do it on a broader scale, do this thing on a grand scale. And I look at it for the most part and I go, well, this is fairly simple. I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, all these different pieces need to connect. I got these modules and components and these services connecting here, and you know, this link data thing over here and all that. You know, we can make this work, but we haven't yet. And all of the stuff that's in yellow up here and in red is the stuff that's in red. We haven't even really figured out how to do it all yet. The stuff that's in yellow, we're just kind of starting to think about a little bit yet. So we really can't do all of this, and we are trying to bring in some other components. I mean, some pieces of this. There's something coming out of the University of Chicago. There's something coming out of Columbia. There's something coming out of a few different places that we're starting to bring together in here. But we can't do this on our own. I can't pull this kind of infrastructure off on our own. Doug said something about this is something that it would take an agency to pull off. And so, yeah, it would take an agency to pull off. But I know that our agency can't even completely pull all of this off. So we're going to need to go bigger than that. So I guess I'd like to finish with leaving this up here for a minute to think about this overall conundrum of how we do all of these different things. And I think it's worth pondering how well are we accomplishing each of these different pieces that's here. And is there something, could we think about something in this space that ESIP itself could become the authority for in itself? There are a number of different, one of the things that I've been thinking about, there are a number of different registries of concepts that we need to have in place that might be extremely valuable to have an x.esipfed.org address behind in terms of the resolution space that we go to count on the set of concepts that we need to bring together in a linked data system in some way. I don't think anything like that yet completely exists, and I think that ESIP Federation could serve as an authority for those, and I'm going to be exploring a few of those options in the next while. So thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Can I get Jeff and Jeff back up front? And I think hopefully we have a roving mic in the back there. So we're going to open it up for a bit of Q&A. And we're going to run a little bit into the lunchtime, but don't worry, the food will still be there waiting for you. So, Phil?
This is Phil Young from George Mason. I have a question probably for all the panelists. From your experience working on the big data and also your vision for the future of big data, what kind of new capabilities or new data products that you think could come online compared to the past without the big data notion?
Phil, could you repeat that? I didn't quite hear the question.
The question is that according to your experience and your vision for the future, what are the new capabilities or new data products that could come online when we have the big data versus that we don't have that notion in the past?
Okay, sure. So one of the things that I've been thinking of, and it's occurred to me looking at a couple of posters last night, with some things that folks are working on, and maybe somewhat in relation to these three different pieces of life cycle. I think we've got to figure out a way to shorten the time frame and the level of complexity to get from scientific software, scientific code written by analysts producing results to true production capabilities that can scale to a much bigger level. And we're still working under a paradigm where for many research scientists, it's a download and process offline, not a write my code against online processing services that give me some pieces of the answer that I need. So I think we've got to figure out a way to go from scientific code to hardened software that can scale up to deal with the kinds of big data that we're starting to produce in streams.
Can I try? Yeah. Sure, go ahead. So I agree with Sky that we need to do that, and in fact that playing in an arena like the cloud may sort of force improvement in that. I think though in terms of new products, ideas for new products, we don't really know yet, at least in the NOAA case, we're leaving it open. I mean, if we knew, we could all go out and start making a ton of money or something like that. So if you have one, talk to me later. But we believe that there are new products that could be made that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, I think some of the goals that we have are to sort of create a more seamless user experience where the acts of discovering the data and accessing and using it, the lines between those two things tend to sort will blur a little bit, and you create these sorts of you have the data like Sky said where you can just analyze it online. You don't have to bother with the overhead of downloading it and processing it, doing all these things. You can get to more of the what sorts of questions do you want to ask? What are you looking for? What do you want to do? What do you need to know? And that where that whole experience becomes a little bit, hopefully a lot more seamless. And I think some of the technologies that are coming online will help us kind of move the ball down the field that way.
Go ahead, Ted.
Thanks, guys, for insights. I wanted to try and bring two things together. Jeff mentioned some of the metadata work that we've been doing as part of Betty, and he also mentioned that one of the goals of that work is to try and create tools that can be used by other partners in USGEO. And then Sky came and suggested that maybe ESIP was a place where we could do make some of this commons. And so I just wanted to put in a shameless plug. In that metadata work, we use specifically the ESIP wiki as a place to share information about how various metadata concepts are implemented in different dialects used across the USGEO communities and agencies. And we did that with Jeff's guidance, vision, whatever. Because we were hoping to rather than use the NASA wiki, which has a lot of great NASA specific stuff, to build that commons for all of us working together on evaluating, improving the understanding and use and accessibility of this data. So we have a little experiment going on, which I hope brings together the support from NASA and sort of the idea that you mentioned, Sky. So I wanted to have an opportunity to make people aware of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I glossed over that so quickly there. I pulled that up as my example back a couple of slides ago because that is an absolute fantastic resource of information that's immediately actionable for much of the work that we're doing. So I really appreciate what NASA's been able to contribute through that and through your work. Thank you.
Mohan?
Thank you for three nice presentations. They complemented each other very nicely. while that slide is still on the screen, clearly there are challenges in doing each one of those three pieces in any organization or agency. But a bigger challenge is going from research to operations or from operations to research in certain disciplines. So that's another dimension that needs to be thought through, how you transition research into operations, decision support, and other societal applications. The second question I had was related to the NOAA Big Data project. Clearly, getting the data to these CRADA vendors is a start. But the bigger challenge is layering services on top of that data. Otherwise, it's just a storage mechanism like Glacier, and it's not going to be used all that much. And that's where I think the ESIP community or the geoinformatics community can provide a lot of solutions that currently do not exist in these CRADA vendors organizations, because even though they're all big and with deep pockets, with the exception of OCC, they don't have the knowledge that exists in this room. And it's extremely important for our community to connect to these vendors so that the public, scientists, and educators really benefit from the data that gets stored in the cloud.
Yeah, Mohan, thank you very much for saying that, because I had actually meant to say something similar and forgot, which is, the NOAA Big Data Project and other similar things that could happen provide a sandbox for people to play in with minimal risk with some data and, work with just on the software to process the data in place. You can actually get grants for modest amounts of computing time, so you don't even necessarily have to pay for the computing. And a group like ESIP would be the best position to start experimenting and trying to come up with the new products that we may be able to extract out of the data, or even the new science, right? Analyses of types that we haven't done before. So that's very good. I was going to comment on your first point, but I forgot. Oh, I just want to mention you researched operations. So the NOAA chief scientist, Dr. Rick Spinrad, has done a lot of thinking about that and has, I don't know if it's issued or still in draft, work on a science strategy or something. I forget the exact name, but he gives a great talk about it, which I'm not able to repeat. But if you get a chance to hear him talk about that or get a copy of that document, I think it will address some of your concerns there.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that as well. And I guess, Mohan, what I'd say, part of the argument that I'm making is that when we try to go directly from research to operations without applying engineering discipline, that's when we blow up some of these things. And I think that it's, I see it happening in EarthCube right now with a number of the EarthCube projects that are going on, that they're being interesting projects coming together through computer science teams without the benefit of some of the pieces that we need to do in the engineering discipline are kind of detrimental to those. And I know in USGS, we're trying to do some work across a number of areas to revive a professional development grade called the EDGE program that for engineering discipline that we hope to help interject more of that professional engineering into some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, just to follow up point on that, I completely agree. The way I tend to see things like this is, I think these, things like EarthCube and these research, it is a difficult problem, and I think, the research is absolutely essential because that's where the innovations, oftentimes will come from. The sort of grant-based sorts of things, and I think sometimes at the agency levels there's an assumption that if we just throw enough awesome seeds on the ground, that a self-sustaining ecosystem will sprout up, and that's I don't personally share that view. But I think it has to be a combination of things. I mean, I think you have to do the research, you have to come up with these innovations, but then there has to be some sustenance, and that's the sweet spot where at the agency level where the engineering discipline comes in, where it's like, okay, how do I make that bridge? How do I make that leap from research to operations, and how do I sustain it? So,
okay,
thank you.
So we've got Bob and then James. If anyone has a burning question, you better stand up soon because I'm gonna finish up soon.
So actually, the last two responses were the perfect segue into my question, which, to put you on the spot, is really about the agencies not represented at the table. So, we have NSF, which doesn't seem to get this and should be here and is talked about, and people in the community who are users of your data and data coming out of NSF research. It seems like the agencies never really coordinate, and there's not a mechanism to get NSF educated about these back-end infrastructural issues. And, DOE's not here, and many, there are other agencies that support. But do you guys have thoughts on how to improve the integration of the agencies and, thinking about big data and these infrastructure issues and how that could be maybe facilitated by the Federation?
That's a great point, and I think we've been told in no uncertain terms that this is the last time that the two Jeffs in the Sky panel will ever be convened. So that's probably good. No, I'm just, but no, you're absolutely right. And we do need to, and you look at, say, the stuff that's been going on through the USGO Data Management Working Group. It's mostly been NASA, NOAA, and USGS, to a great extent. I mean, we certainly have other involvement there, though, and other folks starting to plug in. But I think it all comes down to people, and it comes down to finding the right people to get at the table to provide leadership within their organization to help to bring this forward. And I think we absolutely need to bring Department of Energy into a lot of these conversations. We need to bring NSF to the table around a lot of these things. It's been a conundrum for me too, and I don't have a complete answer to it. I'm still working to try to bring more of USGS to the table because there's a heck of a lot more stuff that we're doing as well that needs to be represented here. So
I think it's a really important point, Bob, and it is a problem. And it's hard to do. I mean, I agree it's important for us at the kind of grassroots or at the working level to do what we can to sort of come together. But at the end of the day, the reality is everybody has their kind of day jobs and their own missions, and all the agencies have different missions, and we tend to get sort of focused on that. And I think while we should be doing what we can in communities like this and ESIP, I think there's ultimately going to have to be some kind of pressure from the top down to sort of kind of break that inertia a little bit, to sort of, require, us to find, however, I don't know what form that would take, honestly, but there's going to have to be some sort of pressure applied or pain point or something that has kind of forced people out of their ruts. But I agree, it's a problem. So.
Can I? Sorry, but I'm going to give a more optimistic counterpoint. We have this. No. Okay, so we have this USGO Data Management Group, and it's true that the co-chairs are, basically sitting right here, NASA, NOAA, USGS right now. Okay, but we're not the only members. Okay, so we have EPA, USDA, NSF, DOE have been there. In fact, there's an EPA person here right now, Kevin. There's an NSF person here right now, Amy, or at least they were earlier, right? So it's not like they're never here. And so I think we are working together to the extent we can, but it's hard because even just within our own agencies, there's a lot of fractionization, if that's the right word, and even within the part of our own agencies, everybody's doing something different. So Soren had those herding cats things. Okay, so we're herding cats within subparts of NOAA, and then all of NOAA, and then all of the agencies, and it's just.
Just one more quick thing. I mean,
there is willingness, I think.
So, I mean, to this whole thing of sustainable scientific data infrastructure, I mean, if we can do some work over the next year to create a real piece of infrastructure that the ESIP is known for. I mean, ESIP itself is not going to do it. It's not like the executive committee is going to do it. We're just going to have to decide decide as a community that, okay, instead of building something at usgs.gov, I'm going to go figure out a way to build it at esipfed.gov somewhere. And I think if we were to, or whatever it happens to be, if we were to get around to building, something that this community was known for, something that was a rallying point that we said, okay, look, instead of, for this NSF project that I've got funded, instead of going and building my thing off of my EDU, I'm going to go figure out how to build it off of this .org. I think we could start to create a little bit of a lodestone to bring this together.
Thanks, guys. So just a reminder, ESIP is you. I think that's what Sky was saying, is that there's an opportunity there. So, James?
Hey, I'm James Gallagher. I'm an OpenDAP cat herder. So, a simple question, maybe, I hope anyways.
Closer to the mic.
So, the cloud and cloud computing and the initiatives that you guys are running, do you see or foresee a future when a significant fraction or all of the data that your agencies hold resides in cloud computing facilities? Would those nominally be commercial facilities? And how do you imagine balancing the financial issues of paying those companies to make the data available, to store the data, to persist the data, versus the federal government sort of mandate to make data open and freely available?
Well, the short answer to your question is yes, I do see that happening, but the challenge for us is to make sure that we don't kind of hang ourselves out there and put the things you just mentioned at risk, in doing so. I think there's a lot to be gained by leveraging that sort of technology, but we have to do it carefully and make sure that, we're not overcommitted and that we do meet our mandate to preserve the data and keep it open and all those sorts of things. So, and it is a complex question. It sounds simple, and then once you start thinking about it, you quickly realize, there's a lot of things you got to think through to be able to do this. But in short, yes, I see that. I see it going that way.
So I think the cloud is going to change a lot of stuff over time. And I don't mean necessarily just commercial cloud, but the idea of scalable computing available on demand when you need it is huge. It's going to be over time like the transformation from the old days when every factory had a steam engine outside running a system of pulleys which drove the lathes inside the thing, to everything has an electric motor and you just plug it in and the electricity magically appears. So instead of buying a bunch of computers and forklifting them into a special room with heating and cooling and all that, and setting it all up and running around with system administrators, just kind of the computation is out there somewhere, and when you need it, you use it, and when you don't need it, you turn it off. That just changes everything. So yeah, I think eventually all the data is going to transition through the cloud. That doesn't mean that we're going to have to buy storage for all of our, whatever it is now, 80 petabytes of data continuously on one commercial company's cloud. But something is going to happen in this kind of elastic computing space that's going to change a lot. And ESIP could be at the forefront of what we do with that.
Yeah, and despite not talking about it, USGS is very much in that realm as well. We've had Landsat on AWS and Google now available for the Google engines for a while, and some really interesting things have come out of that already in terms of innovative applications against those forms of the data. And if not for a number of contract snafus along the way, we would have moved quite a lot further than we have today. But it's definitely heading in that direction for us.
Thank you. And Dave, last one.
I'm Dave Folker with OpenDAP, and I resonate with the possibility that ESIP could become if I understood you correctly, the authoritative locus of information at the concept level about Earth science data infrastructure. And so, Sky, two questions for you: are there exemplars that you would point us to that somehow are similar to or represent the kind of thing that you would like to see happening in the Federation? And two, what do you see as the next steps toward that end?
Yeah, I'm not sure about exemplars per se, but I guess what I'm starting to envision is some form of lightweight operational cyber infrastructure that can support the connecting tissue that we need between a few of our interagency efforts that are going on, particularly around the vocabulary space. I mean, there are lexicons and vocabularies that are needed for which there is co-ownership, obvious co-ownership between agencies, and each one of us are potentially doing some pieces of those, but we're not doing them with modern semantic technologies very well. And I think that leveraging the capabilities that have been explored through the semantic working group here, some of the technologies that have come up around that, and then, you know, I mean, we're not talking about a tremendous amount of massive data. We're talking about a very small amount of data, but powerful data that can be used between our organizations in some way. So, I mean, some examples out there are spatial feature registries of different kinds. That's something that I'm working on within my particular space. We have a resource of, 30 million features or so. It's not massive, but it's big enough that and potentially useful enough that it could belong to the corpus of us as opposed to one individual organization. Certainly.
All right. Thank you. Let's thank our panel. Your taxpayer dollars are at work up here for our civil servants, so thank you. I want to close this session with two things. There is an opportunity for informal lunchtime discussion on making ESIP collaborations more fun. I won't tell you who's instigating that because it might sort of spoil the fun, but those tables are identified by reserved signs. So that's what they're reserved for. Self-selecting, if you want to participate, go down, sit at one of those tables and have that discussion. Final thing is the sort of the last official thing for ESIP-wide is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. There is the now recurring ESIP State of the Federation, which is a way to get informed about sort of the big cross-section of what's going on inside the Federation. So many of you have your heads down this week and are going to specific sessions, but this is an opportunity to find out what else is going on to see who you can collaborate with. So that's 8 a.m. tomorrow morning in this room. Otherwise, enjoy your lunch.